Welcome. My name is Kenneth. My pronouns are he and him, and I am the curator and host of this here reading series, Poetry at the Point. This is our April edition. Happy National Poetry Month. I'm really excited to be with you this evening. I have some fantastic poets and lovely people to boot. Reading this evening, Pamela Garvey, Karen Head, and Brooking Gatewood. I'm excited to bring them up in a moment. I'm going to start with some announcements, just like usual. First of all, thanks for doing your best to stay safe. If you want, there are some masks over by the front, so you can choose to grab one of those if you like. Shout outs always to the members of the St. Louis Poetry Center. You can become a member yourself at the website. You can set it up to have that auto-debited, set it and forget it. Super fantastic and wonderful. Highly recommend that. Shout out to the Missouri Arts Council and the Regional Arts Commission who support this series and other programming that we do every single year. And as always, thanks to the Focal Point for this lovely space with wonderful acoustics and an intimate vibe where we can have this in person. I don't announce this kind of stuff often, but I think I would like to start doing it. We are one of many different readings that happen in our region throughout the community, right? And I want to note that there are MFA readings this week at WashU, actually tonight, and then again on Thursday at 8 o'clock, I believe, in that really awesome space whose name is escaping me that's in Brooking Hall. So highly recommend that. Goody House is this Thursday via Wild Fruit Projects. That's in my neck of the woods in South City on, I think, Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Spine Bookstore and Cafe every Sunday evening from 7 to 9. There's a featured poet plus tons of open mic time. I'm mentioning these in particular because these are the folks who we have synergy with and have kind of shared stages with. So I want to make sure we're shouting out our siblings across the region. So check them out if you can. Awesome people that you will see some familiar faces at. Housekeeping, if you're here in the room with us, bathrooms are out this door to the left. If you want to support our local restaurant next door, Casa Maya, go grab yourself a beverage and bring it on in here. And then when you're done with it, take it back at the end of the night. And last bit of housekeeping, there are books for sale, I think, by all three of our poets this evening. And those will be available, you can walk up to them and talk to them. You'll see who they are. But they will be selling those back at the table back there. So please support them as well. If you're watching this on Al Gore's internet, hi, good to see you. Glad you're here too, Facebook Live or otherwise. Always comment, always share the link. We want to build momentum for this reading series, but for these poets' work too. We do have a full slate this evening, so most of the time we don't have time, but if we do have time, we will bring up our poets again to close out the hour with just some very casual question and answers. So if you have some questions for them, we will try to squeeze those in, put those in the comments, and Aaron will try to get those my way. If you're viewing this after April 25th in the future, please still comment and share. We want to build support. Now, on to the poetry. First poet this evening, Pamela Garvey, the author of the collection of poetry 7 Miles Deep from 2017. Her poetry, prose, and book reviews have appeared in Esquire, definitely not burying the lead there, Missouri Review, Margie, Spoon River Poetry Review, the North American Review, and many other journals. Honors include being a semi-finalist for the Discovery of the Nation Prize. She is the author of 2 poetry chapbooks, Things Impossible to Swallow from 2013 and Fear from 2008, a finalist for the New Women's Voices competition. Garvey is also a playwright. Her most recent production of the full-length play, The Piddlings, was in 2018, and she is currently working on a book of lyric essays entitled Mother Matter, centered on raising a son with mental illness. Please welcome to the stage, Pamela Garvey.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the Poetry Center. We're glad that you're here. And I'm going to open and close with a poem from the 2017 collection that's back there, and then I'm going to read from the book in progress. So, title is 7 Miles Deep. That's a reference to the Marianas Trench, right? Not sure if other people find that terrifying. I do. The idea of just going underwater for 7 miles. If you go deep enough in the water, there are fish that have evolved to not have eyes, and they have like these folds where the eyes were. You can also sometimes see similar fish in caves, and that's what happens in this poem that's entitled Among Fish Without Eyes. Like the blind navigating the damp down here in the caverns, my son whispers, turn the light back on, and then our faces are reflected. This pool is so still, it mirrors even the scar under his brow, even the knot at the bridge of my nose. Then fish without eyes swarm through us. Where do we begin? Where do we end? Noses and eyes shimmer into gills and tails. My lips elongate. His limbs vanish in thin streams. Is that him, mute and finned? He dips his net, calls me his prisoner. My mouth puckers, belongs to another saying my son's name, in a voice that frightens him. Shuddering, he pokes a fish where eyes would be, socket with thin fold of scales which jerk. Let it go, I say. When he does, it folds, rises, lingers on the waves of my head. Look, Mommy, you've got a white horn. All right, I have a visual aid with my next piece. It's a Picasso painting, obviously not the real thing, obviously it's a, copy that doesn't look great, but you might know it. It's from his blue period. It's the old guitarist, right? And so if you can't see it, I can always pass it around to you. I'm not sure if everybody can see it. And just a trigger warning, these next two pieces that I'm reading deal with suicide. So you'll hear that poem referenced in this piece. This first piece, so this is this book that I'm writing, Mother Matter, is like a memoir and lyric essays, some written like prose poems, some in line breaks, all sorts of forms. Some of the pieces are long, and then in between them are these short letters. And so this letter is entitled, Letter to My Suicidal Son, Take 1. I'm trying to explain my feelings through Picasso's long, lean guitarist with head turned down, eyes closed, lips parted on the verge of song or speech. As if the speechless moment before song was the art. The speechless moment is urgency. It slides in between words, in between notes, in between brushstrokes. It must seem strange to you how I've devoted my life to poetry, yet remain silent when you rage or panic. When you call me wall, I know you need something other than an unsmiling nod. Maybe you hope I can spin words into silk as sturdy as a web. Maybe you worry I don't hear your words hammering against me. When you were younger, you'd sneak up on me and scream, boo, as you grabbed my back. I'd swivel around, smile, and ask if you wanted strawberries or cheese. How come you never get scared? Once you asked, I jumped and trembled, but you knew better and soon abandoned that game. I wish I would have rolled with the moment of play the first time you tried to scare me. I had wanted to offer a counterpoint to the whirling dervish of anxieties that plagued you. Maybe I should have told you my own anxieties are like a blue thread woven into the fabric of waking, working, breathing. It would be insincere for me to rant. Walls of white spaces surrounding lines of poetry are also part of grief, fear, and love. Sometimes I'm trying to be the blank wall so your brushstrokes stand out. Sometimes I'm trying to be the wall you run into, the wall that shelters you, or the wall where you can hang your blue mood like Picasso did. I can't explain why Picasso's paintings draw me in, or why blue is my favorite color. My birthstone is turquoise and yours sapphire. You entered the world to Miles Davis kind of blue on instant replay as I forgot all about the soothing jazz and pushed you into life. Since that day, you have been my sky, my royal, my peacock. The photo of you, age 6, in a blue polo, pouty lower lip protruding in a smile as you look over your shoulder, hangs in the living room where a jagged crack in the wall flows from the bottom of the frame. All these cracks in the plaster are like scars in the walls of our home. A house is not a home until we scar it with pictures. Home is where scars start. When I was the same age as you in that photo, I pushed my lungs, swimming an entire lap underwater. So focused on speed, I didn't notice I had the pool to myself. As my heart thudded against my chest, I surged, extending my arm as far as I could to tap the wall and burst into air. I burst into a cacophony of screeches and lifeguard whistles as other children raced to shelter. Dark clouds swept the sky. My family was nowhere in sight. Gasping for breath, I tried to call out, but couldn't. What I want to tell you is that's how I feel when you tell me how you don't know if you can continue living. I stare at you as if studying the you of your frown or the shape of your rage was the art of parenting. But we are so much messier than art. And because I do not understand, I'm scared silent and searching for cover before lightning sears the sky. Then I'm going to read an excerpt from a piece. It's the title piece in the book, Mother Matter, and it's a piece in 7 sections, and they are matter cannot be created or destroyed. And so, and the person I'm speaking to is obviously myself. And so this is the second section, entitled Can. Take matter into your own hands, Mother Matter. Devote every second to preventing his suicide. Shake open a used grocery sack and fill it with all the meds that fail. Prozac, Lexapro, Celexa, Luvox, Elavil, Zoloft, Risperidone. Did you almost overlook the 800 capsule ibuprofen? Forget your arthritis. Sleep aids? You think you can risk deep sleep and failing to call 911? No REM during code red. Watch your moisturizer shatter in the sink as you sweep your hand along the top shelf, feeling for stray pills. Toss the shards of glass in the sharp object sack. While you're in the bathroom, empty the trash can of anything sharp. Toss the razors. Don't even keep one in the gym bag in the car. Shaving is a luxury. And the scissors, 2 in the bathroom. The pills you can dump in the pharmacy slot for expired meds. The sharp object sack, triple bag it, fling it in a dumpster several blocks away. You can do this. Can, able, capable. Etymology, Sanskrit and Greek meaning to know. What do you know? You've read countless peer-reviewed studies and books recommended by therapists who failed to help him live in his skin without picking at it. What you know. Not a single day has passed since his birth without images of him. Age 2, collecting cicada shells on a hike. Age 16, people watching at the drive-through pharmacy. Look at her! I need to make a film about Southside fashionistas. He held his stomach, laughing at the middle-aged woman standing at the drive-through, wearing pajamas with pink polar bears on ice caps. With his phone, he zoomed in on her flaming red curls clumped into pillow dips along her head as she screamed at the intercom, I don't have all fucking day. If you fail at preventing his suicide, the most important job of your life, you try to imagine what it would be like to grow old without new memories of him at 20, 30, 40. Can, permitted by conscience, Merriam-Webster. Your conscience burns for being selfish enough to think about your own future in his absence. His conscience permits only self-harm, punishing him for imagining he's hurt others. I can't have pleasure, he cries, tears streaming down his face. If only you could lock intrusive thoughts inside a hermetically sealed can. Can, the receptacle, is matter. In I Ching, can, translation, plunging in, is water, which is a receptacle. When he was 8, you gave him your hand in a riptide at Jones Beach. He clung to you so tightly he could have drug you under. You pointed to nearby waves heading toward shore. In a few minutes we'll be close enough to swim to them. Just relax into the tug. Float on your back. Look, you pointed at seagulls. Imagine if we could touch the sky like they do. He asked, how do they never fall? When he was 8, you told him whom to call after 911 if he ever found you unconscious. A motherless child, a childless mother, both involve scorching the core with a branding iron. Mental illness is its own branding iron. Speculation. In the 12th century, can meant a hollow, a depression. Does your depressed teen see suicide as a plunge into hollowing himself? No can do. Nothing in the Milky Way is hollow. Atomic physics means empty space cannot exist. Annihilation is simply particles and antiparticles turning back into pure energy. Ken is the energy required to station yourself on his bed for hours as he holds your hand in between his while he weeps. In I Ching, Ken is the mountain. Translation, keeping still. Though your body can still, thoughts race around your brain like particles colliding. Would he steal pills from a friend's medicine chest? Would he grind a pen into his wrist? Did he count all the knives? 12 in the knife block, out in the open, 12 sirens calling to him? Ken is dropping them in a dumpster blocks away after he falls asleep. Take one you may need to prepare food and wrap it in layers, pillowcases tied into knots. Stick them way in the bottom and back of your closet under books you plunged into when he fell asleep and you could not. And then I'm going to end with this poem that's entitled After Her Son Disappeared. I hover always at the epicenter. Breathe as if gravel were suddenly winged. I crawl through cracks in earth's crust, foraging for a cradle that squeaks, a boy whose laugh is diamonds. He is my breath's arrow, creature wild as a river. I wish I could drown in his rushes. A log, loitering, a wind, less than a whisper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was powerful. I appreciate it. And I just have to say, I want to take this opportunity to say how thrilling it is to have the sound of a baby at this reading. Like, it's really, really lovely. And just, so thank you. The different generations we have represented in this audience is really, really, it's pleasing to me. So welcome. Our next reader is Karen Head, the author of Disrupt This, MOOCs and the Promises of Technology, a nonfiction book about issues in contemporary higher education, as well as 5 books of poetry, Lost on Purpose, Sassing, My Paris Here, Shadow Boxes, and On Occasion, 4 Poets, 1 Year. She serves as editor of the International Poetry Journal Atlanta Review and is secretary for the Poetry Atlanta Board of Directors. On a more unusual note, and I'm going to argue the dopest note, the Poet Laureate of Waffle House. A title that reflects an outreach program to bring arts awareness to rural high schools in Georgia, which has been generously sponsored by the Waffle House Foundation. So all jokes aside, pretty amazing. She is also the Poet Laureate of Fulton County, Georgia. She is a professor at Missouri S&T. Please welcome Karen to the stage.
I'm so tempted by the stool to do the Anne Sexton thing, Except I don't smoke, and so. And I'm not wearing a white, beautiful white blouse, silk blouse. She was amazing. So cool. Thank you to the Poetry Center. Thank you to my fellow readers. And it's a delight to join you all. Generally, I don't start with this, but it was a request. So I think it will speak for itself. Always open. In the dream, I'm back on the road, driving south from Lincoln, Nebraska toward Kansas City, windows halfway down, Midwest winter air smacking me awake, reminding me to breathe. I'm suffering. Homesickness is the story I tell, but I know there's more to it, this loneliness, these too fast heartbeats, this need to escape. Just outside St. Joe, traffic from the KC airport roars overhead, and just off the exit, I see it glowing warm yellow in the darkness, so I pull in. This is no photoshopped Hopper Nighthawks. No, this is home, always open, always there, waiting for me past any curfew. I shake the snow from my hair, find the place empty except for one counter stool, which begins to spin. And Bourdain tells me to join him, so I do, because I've got nowhere else to be. I shout, scattered, smothered, covered, diced, and capped, and laughter erupts. Now the place is full of people I couldn't save. We are all eating pecan waffles, telling each other stories, and I say, someday maybe I'll find a way to be happy. And Bourdain says, don't you have somewhere you should be? The faint sound of the airplanes begins to amplify. Everything begins to shake. I dive down, cover my ears, shut my eyes to the looming shadows. Startled, I find myself back in Atlanta. You are snoring again. And for once, for always, this makes me happy. So, I swore that I would never write love poetry. Yeah, never say never. What we missed. The giddy flush of young love we've only glimpsed a few times. That evening in the museum when you gave me a CD mixtape, the likes of which I hadn't heard in decades. That morning you met me at the Dusseldorf train station, bag thrown over your shoulder, arms wide. You lifted me off my feet, swung me a quarter turn. That night we drank port until 2 a.m. and danced our way home under fairy lights. That afternoon we cuddled close at the National Zoo, held your camera at arm's length and snapped happiness. Each morning when you bring me tea, I concede finding each other late was for the best. Still, sometimes I mourn the years we never had, even the ones that would have destroyed us. So these are all from my latest collection, Lost on Purpose. And I think just because it's that time of the term when you're a professor or a teacher, I'm sort of gravitating to teaching poems. At the Albion Beatnik bookstore. So there is probably a little bit of history that you need to know. This book makes mention of Dante Rossetti, the famous Raphaelite painter who was obsessed with his wife, Lizzie. She's the blazing redhead that you often see in those paintings. She died. He had a book written at the time, and he buried it with her. And then a few years later, he decided he wanted it back. And that's not why I'm angry at him. I'm angry at him because he didn't have the courage to go get it himself. At the Albion Beatnik bookstore, Oxford, 2011. Dennis has just insisted I have a piece of weak old sponge cake. It'll go off any minute. The strawberry filling is a little too red, but I love his shop, and I take the first dry bite as I hear a young man, a student in literature, the Derrida, a dead giveaway, say to an obviously smitten girl, all poets are whores. Scent of bergamot in my tea starts to soften my scowl, and I notice Rossetti's The House of Life wedged in the corner of the bottom shelf, and as I pull out the volume, I think, really? All poets are thieves. Dante, I can't blame you for wanting to repossess the poems, even if it meant disturbing Lizzie in her Highgate grave. You fed on her day and night to fuel your own fantasies, but wanting to take back your words does not mean you loved her less. It's not the muse's place to possess the art. What I cannot forgive is your cowardice, sending Charles to her grave. It should have been you who pulled the worm-fed leaves from her tangled copper hair. So, a little bit of mention of the South over dinner. So, in my collection, Sassing, and yes, this is adorable me too. I have a collection of poems that are sort of homages to very famous poems by male Southern writers. I don't say that their experience is wrong. I just say that if you're a woman, your experience is probably different. This one is called Mayday Sermon, and it is based on the same titled poem by James Dickey about a young woman who is caught messing around with an itinerant man by her father. He runs the man off. He strings her up in the barn. He beats her within an inch of her life. Eventually she gets down, she murders her father and burns everything down, and then rides off naked on the back of the motorcycle into the night with the man she was caught with. It's a lot. And it starts with an epigraph from Mayday Sermon called "Listen, O Daughters, Turn, Turn." Mayday Sermon. No, not May. Not hot enough for fiery conversions. It was late July. The smell of chicken houses drifting through the open windows, the church piano strings stressed atonal, popsicle stick advertising fans flapping off beat. One side, Christ, night cooled in the shade of Gethsemane. The other, the side, the new porch at Ingram's funeral parlor. It was a Friday, and I was just days short of 16. His name was Bobby, and he would leave in another year off to engineering school, his mind always full of pure science. But tonight, his curiosity had excited my mama into believing that there might finally be a good Christian boy in my future. It would only be a matter of weeks before a future film student would come back from Texas the summer with his father, full of mystery beyond anything I'd found in church, complete with his jazz shoes that made everybody think he was gay. I would choose him over Bobby for my homecoming date, and his car would break down and we wouldn't get our photo made at the dance, and after I drove him home in my mother's car, he would ask if I wanted to fool around, and I would say no. A few years later, we'd have the same conversation, and he would show me his journal where he wrote that he dreamed I was on fire, and the entry would be on the same day my ex-husband doused me with developing fluid, and again, I would say no. So here I was with Bobby in a whitewashed clapboard country church during summer revival, and the three preachers had been at it for hours, and everyone was singing, "Just as I am without one plea." And the preacher was waving his arms in the air and bellowing, "Come, sinner, come home." And that's when it happened. Wanda, a church matron, spied Bobby and made a beeline for him. "Boy, do you know the Lord Jesus Christ as your eternal Savior?" Bobby glanced over his shoulder at me, and I tried to say, "Run!" The next thing I knew, he was up front, down on his knees, and I couldn't get near to him because there was a circle of folks praying over him. All I could think was, get me out of here. I wanted to scream, "He's a Unitarian." But I choked. on an old-time silence. All I could feel was my own baptism in the mossy concrete pool out back of the church, filled every summer by the local fire department, Brother Morgan pushing me under my dress pinned between my legs so it wouldn't float up. The preacher hollered at Bobby, "Give your heart over to the Lord, son." Eventually, they gave up when Bobby couldn't see what they wanted him to see. And when we drove home, he laughed, but I just wanted to cry. We fooled around for a few weeks, but it never got past third, and then I dumped him out of pure shame. Brother Jim, you know damn well there ain't any women preachers in Gilmer County, and even if there were, they wouldn't have to warn young women about lust and murder and riding off into the night, naked on a motorcycle, man between their knees. Because that night, late in July, during my 16th year, I was just one county over, just a few years past my own drowning and the new dry dress for the photos, and I could tell you then what I know now for sure. You don't need your daddy to string you up in a barn to beat the sin out of you, because the sin swirls like a spring tornado from the moment you gasp into this world. And the only thing that separates men and women is that the women know that neither love nor God can save you from some things. So I'm going to read 2 more. Maybe 3. Squeeze them in really fast. I don't think these require any. Menopause in the pandemic. That was fun. Turning point. 1977. Back straight, feet flat on the floor, elbows locked to ribs. Dutifully, I have fed and aligned a pristine sheet. Pike is set and ready to share my words, but those will have to wait for now. Everything is dictated from Mrs. I used to be a secretary in the city before I got married, who comes to our school each week to teach the girls the mysteries of this machine. The quick brown fox jumps. I see the image first, resist the need to force my mind to separate out each letter, try to quickly translate the correct actions into my fingers, still so clumsy. The space bar jams. Impatient, I swivel on the steel chair when slowly I feel the seeping warmth between my legs. No, my white pants will soon be imprinted with the ribbon red language of my body, and I feel the panic of being a woman. 2022. Today, I tell the pregnant nurse a full year has passed, that my body uses a different language now, and she silently keys in this data. I want her to tell her how I still pound keyboards, am haunted by misstrikes that are no longer possible. How I want to return to that moment at the end of each line where no matter what else happened, you can experience a catharsis, the sounding of the bell, an invitation to slam the platen back to the beginning of a new line, beginning again, always beginning again. Perspective has an epigraph from a Whitesnake song. Some of you will remember Whitesnake, hair band. I don't know where I'm going, but I sure know where I've been. It's 1987, and mind you, Fuck You World anthem is Here I Go Again by Whitesnake, which I play over and over on my Sony Discman that's riding shotgun in my $400 cash 76 Mercury Capri. With a number of unpredictable and predictable accidents ahead, I'm shifting gears, windows down, cruising along the Chattahoochee behind Eagles Landing subdivision, imagining myself as Tawny Katane, somersaulting between Jaguars, thinking the height of success is having a rock star with hair bigger than mine stick his tongue down my throat. Today, I write with perspective longer than the fake nails I used to have. I catch a replay of the video on YouTube, notice for the first time that those boys, if you stripped them and shaved them bald, would fall heavy like Samson. And Tawny, I teach her how to write poetry, dance naked, in metaphor. But before any of that can happen, my brakes will fail, and I'll slam into an embankment, totaling what's left of my youth. And one last short one to end with, and thank you all again, literal. And that's L-I-T-T-O-R-A-L, not literal, although it's both. Somewhere beyond this January fog that's walled me in against the dunes are murky Atlantic waves sneaking ashore. From where I sit, toes clenching the cool white sand, I can hear the squeaky kip-kip call of a stormy petrel surfing the crest. If I was 15 instead of 55, I would concoct some epiphany from this solitude, imagine myself a lighthouse or a mermaid. But long ago I stopped needing such clarification, wanting now only to stretch my legs toward the inevitable ebbing tide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. White Snake on CD, man. I still had tapes at that point. Sounds like some rich people stuff. Okay. Just kidding. Our last reader for this evening is Brooking Caldwell, who's been writing in verse since she could hold a crayon and has a history of scheming up interactive performance experiments that bring poetry off the page and back into the body and community. From salons and walking tours and embodied language workshops to a TEDx talk and mixed media collaborations. Born and raised in St. Louis, she's absurdly happy to be back and rerooting in Riverside soil after many years in California, and is currently pursuing her MFA with Shane Seeley at UMSL. She recently won the 2022 UMSL Graduate Prize in Poetry, the 2022 Deanne, right? Wagner, she's like, I don't know, poetry contest, and is published in Bad Ken, no relation to me, the Journal of Place, which is forthcoming. Brooking, please take the stage.
Though I'm all about embodiment and performative, usually I got this idea in my head tonight that I was going to sit on a stool and read on the page, which I actually don't usually do, so I'm going to do that. Just the mic. So I'm going to be real, my heart is a little blown open right now. Pamela and Karen, that was just so beautiful, so I'm feeling really full, and it's kind of a strange experience to take that energy and then read my own stuff. So give myself a transition moment here. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's really an honor, and it touches me really deeply to get to read in St. Louis. I'm very much a sense of place kind of person, so it really means a lot to me to get to do the poetry thing here. Thank you all for coming. I did spend about 15 years in California, and while I was out there, I became a little bit of a personal growth junkie, which is a thing that happens to people who move to California. I got really into Buddhism and Burning Man and all sorts of things. So those themes show up in my poems a lot. And this is a poem from that era. I was dating a kind of shamanic guy who was really into martial arts, and he came home one day talking about how they were learning to punch each other in the face in a soft way. And it was his teacher had told him that it should be like the buttering of bread, the way that you give and receive a punch. And I thought that was insane, and I was making breakfast and having my own experience, and so this poem came out of that. And this is called Burnt Greens. They say it should be easy, like the buttering of bread. And indeed, they move like Taoist masters. But this morning, I made toast, and the bread was rather crumbly, and the butter was not soft. It was cold and hard and bulky in its wrapper. And so I had to pause, standing at the counter with the hot eggs waiting, and the burnt greens aching, and the oily sausage wondering just how I was going to do it. I considered a long while how to best anoint my toast, since yesterday was a disaster. And I imagined the fat lives of those easeful butterers who are superior, surely, at more than making breakfast. And what, I had to wonder, did my toast fiasco say about my oh so fragile life? If the buttering of bread is freedom's secret key, and again, here's me failing. But then I came back. I came back to myself. I came back from my efforts to butter like others. I came back from their teachings on mending my life. And I did this strange thing that I've always enjoyed. I buttered my bread with no knife at all. With a faultlessly firm bulk of fat in one hand and a perfectly crisp slice of toast in the other, I slathered the toast rough and straight on. And I like it this way. More closeness, less dishes. And she melted and he welcomed and breakfast was served. And done in this way of my own quirky Tao, it was easy after all. And the eggs were so warm. And the sausage felt happy. And the burnt greens relaxed, even tasted good, knowing I'd be able to love them. Okay, here's another one on the spiritual theme, the growth junkie thing. I'll let it speak for itself, but it used to be called Shorelines, now it's called Hymn of Watching the Waters, #1. She's a persistent bitch. You know the one. Great mother, Madam Universe. She who laughs and cries, birthing each moment from the infinite entropic womb to the waiting brilliant void, or is it the other way around? We are all just wailing toddlers, crawling after the echoes of her heartbeat as she weans us to this world, grasping at mirages of her breast, purpose, home, wealth, work, family, memories, some wind called love. But this human life is not for succor, and no money, no marriage, no bedtime story can comfort like her milk. And when we seek it, for of course we seek it, when we deny her sweet but savage lullaby of ebb and flow and crash and tide, she thrashes us in perfect intervals, disrupts our plans with undertows and shifting sands and tidal reminders to stop pretending. And eventually it's die or die. And as we let go, she brings us to the bottoms, to that inky place of truth under tumult where there is, finally, a stillness. And once you taste it, once she rocks you in that deep blue lap, it's not so easy to go back to the usual graspings. It's harder to muster the fear required for believing in things like careers, holidays, settling down, time, your name, your holiest grails. It's hard to fall or rise for anything, really. Just the breath, that endless howl of sea, and that which abides the gale. Okay, I know that one's intense. I think I'm going to switch it up and read a piece that I wrote kind of recently that's kind of embarrassingly rhymey, but sometimes I do that when I'm, feeling down. Rhyme is like cathartic for me. And yeah, so this is almost a little Dr. Seuss journey. It's called Midday Musings of an Eco-Queer Nonprofit Professional with a Writing Problem. One fine and latte-laced Thursday afternoon, I was working at my desk and thinking of the moon, which was brighter the night prior than the glow of my screen and which doesn't require so much chocolate and caffeine just to keep my fickle attention. But on this day, the wise moon was in bed, and so here I was click-clacking emails instead of poems, because emails feed mouths and poems just feed souls. And when my eyes took a break from their multi-hour scrolling, they saw on the wall a sloth, slothing, a glow and gloss print. This month's portrait in a gift from WWF, the one for animals, not wrestlers. One of many calendars received as a thanks for donations, which is how things work in the strange world of extraction and Band-Aid foundations. So I feature a few in the office to remind me, even though I use Google to track my time these days. And I kept looking at this sloth captured slothing in a tree, with eyes like shiny coffee beans, alert and pleading, it seemed to me, as if he knew what's coming for all of us. His wiry hair coated in a mossy algae because his lithe, 10-pound wild creature body has been covered by Amazon waters more times than we could possibly fathom, no matter how many nights we've spent in with Attenborough consuming facts with our popcorn. His species, of course, is now endangered, which wasn't so cool back when I majored in such topics in college, but these days it seems all the rage, like anti-trans laws and kicking drags off the stage, but I digress, of course, I digress. His wiry hair is coated in algae also because he moves so slowly that their collectives feel safe to make home on his body. A body, let's remember, that anybody could outrun, but maybe strength has more measures than we learned in school. And his wiry hair, gently coated in algae, is a slow fashion statement that I'm starting to envy. In these 11th hours pushing us toward frenzy under just one henny penny falling sky, which gets me thinking of all that I've been ordering online and how last year's Amazon air pillows could circle the earth more than 800 times, and how this makes me feel more than a little bit queasy and yes, guilty inside, and how when I workshopped a version of this poem the last time, no one found these thoughts believable. And I wonder if my conscience would be believable somewhere a little more blue. But alas, here we are at a desk in Missouri where the mighty muddy's flanked by toxic slurry and white supremacist laws are a flurry, but I digress, of course I digress. So I breathe and breathe and breathe at my desk and refocus and take a vow with old coffee eyes as witness to grow algae on my own wild heart hair and get groceries in person whenever I can here and make peace with my small place in the sloth arc of justice and support the tactics of those among us working with the T-cells trying to protect us, groups like Promo and the United Congregations of Metro East, and sure, WWF, we need rainforests to breathe. So my eyes now rested, the moon waking below. I add more donations to my to-dos and get back to my own work addressing our woes. And all this in the silent mindscape of my office in a 30-minute break between appointments in which I've digressed for this poem pause between us to lament what's been done with our species' genius and ponder what the brown-throated sloth might teach us. All right, I'm gonna do one more. This is a tribute to one of my all-time favorites who we no longer have, Mary Oliver, rest in peace. When I was in California, I did a lot of Zen meditation, so again, it shows up in my poems. And this one, a lot of poems come out of meditation for me. This one's called Like It Is. Sometimes, after staring at a wall until a bell says stop, I find I no longer have it in me to muster up judgments, opinions, a local point of view. Your sweater is teal. Your iPhone seems to be there for you. Your feet look cold. There's still room for projections as the reel turns on at this hand crank of God, and we all have a craving for popcorn. But drained of any stanceness, I must say that cup is black with an inside of white. My pen leaks blue on this crisp, bleached page, like things we made to make our lives easier. The basket is woven. Some socks match, some don't. A sword stands in the basket in the middle of the room like someone, for some reason, put it there. I rose this morning with malaise in my fluids. In the car, NPR aired a piece on Mary Oliver, some New Yorker editor and a critic of her very last book, Devotions. They were playing nice the best they knew how, editor man gently noting how academic poets tend not to appreciate her blatancy. Well, I do, said a voice from my throat to the radio, dislodging some stuckness and waking my veins. So yes, let's be clear. That cup is black. The lotus blooms. The sword and the stone is today in a basket. And as Mary sewed into every line, everything's dressing for love.
Thank you very much. So if the poets are game for it, we could go for about 10 minutes or so. So if y'all want to come back up, we can just close out with just 10 minutes of very relaxed, chill conversations. Yes, I'm talking about you, Pamela and Karen, working. Meanwhile, I will move some stuff around while you make yourselves comfortable. This is where you can tell a joke if you want. No jokes. I won't tell my Britney Spears joke tonight. What's your question?
If you're a poet laureate, Fulton County is it, and you move out of Fulton County, do they strip you of your poet laureate?
That's a really good question, being stripped of your poet laureation. Actually, because I was named during the pandemic, and then I got recruited to Missouri S&T, I actually let them know, and I said, I'm going to be going to Missouri, so you'll want to replace me. And they said, well, you really didn't get a chance, right? And so, and I think it kind of came down to, I was actually the inaugural poet, and Fulton County is the city of Atlanta, so they kind of said, well, we know that you're going to Missouri, but we kind of want you to do this for another term anyway. So the great thing about, we were sort of talking at dinner, right? I mean, one of the great things about the pandemic, and there aren't many, but there are a handful, which is we learned that the arts can be just worldwide all the time. You know, we can have these readings and we can have them in person, but then all those people who can't be here or people who are in other places can sort of be there. So I think that there's a lot of room and a lot of really good stuff that's come out of like just making our communities bigger than the small groups that they used to. So no, I didn't get stripped, but I did just finish my term out, and I guess they're looking for their next person. The Waffle House Poet Laureateship, on the other hand, is a lifetime gig, and so whoever gets it next has to kill me.
Yeah, I was plotting her demise. So I'm going to let you all pick up this one first if you want. So my first thought was just, you're all really good readers of your own poetry, which is not always the case with poets. So it's just so nice to have a full slate of folks who are really good at that. So I'm curious how you all imagine the poetry reading in the context of just your process, right? Because sometimes you're reading it maybe to yourself in your head, but you don't think about it kind of, in front of lots of other folks. So I'm just curious if you have a thought about how you think about your performance of your own poetry in the context of just your process overall, if that makes sense. Anybody want to snag on that one?
I mean, this is like my favorite topic, so. I honestly have a lot of poems where I actually have different versions because, and I know that some people might disagree with that, but I think when you're performing, your purpose is, your medium is different, effectively, and your medium is transmission. And so the way I think about it is, how can I transmit the feeling? Like poems are, I think of them like butterflies that you capture in a jar. And then when you read it, you're letting the butterfly out. But if you're working on the page, you're trying to let the butterfly out in a different way, and you're using different tools. So I think of the performance part as a voice and embodiment activity, And I might take that same poem on the page and take words out and play with the meter a little bit and do things that are the way that the mind reads on the page versus the way the body receives in a room, I think are kind of different. So some of my thoughts.
That's way more profound than I think I am. Yeah, I'm not sure I really think of it very consciously, actually. And I think, I mean, when I'm writing, I'm thinking a lot of voice, or I think I'm listening a lot to the voice, whatever that voice is for that piece. And that has to click. I do read my stuff to myself. It's not the same as having an audience, but I do that. So I listen a lot to it. So I guess for me, the audience is like another test for it in a weird sort of way. I know that sounds weird to say. Obviously, for someone that's already on a book, that's kind of a little late, right? But you hope that you had some experience with it beforehand. But if I'm working on something, maybe it's part of what you're talking about with the body, but having like that energy of actual people in front of you, I think does change it. And I do sometimes go home and actually change things after I read them.
I think teacher me, students often ask when they're doing their first day, like, how do I do this? And what should I read? And I'm terrible at teaching them that because one of my professors, Marilyn Callan, who's one of the most brilliant readers, that she at any one time has about 40 of her poems committed to memory and she performs them. And I really am not that. But it's very much about the moment in the room. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to read until like I have the conversations with people beforehand, or if I'm, it's just, sometimes you learn to feel it. And I think part of that's a luxury after you have a little bit more work. But you do have to practice it. It's like any kind of thing. I mean, I think if you just stand up and you've never actually read your poetry out loud, I mean, poetry is meant to be oral. So you do have to take the time and space beforehand before you give a reading to kind of do that. Because you're right, there are a lot of really bad readers. Like their work on the page is amazing. But yeah, it's like, no, stop reading because that's not the way that poem goes.
It's funny, I can get to that space in terms of like really preparing, but then just kind of feeling the moment as like a host, like asking all questions, but the idea of just kind of deciding what I'm gonna read as like a poet in the moment, that sounds terrifying, so good on you. Another question I had was, and I noticed that visual art came up a couple different times in y'all's work, and definitely in conversation before the reading, so I'm curious from y'all what you gain as writers from engaging with visual art. I know for myself, or any kind of other art, when I was an undergrad, one of my favorite classes that I took was like an intro-level sculpture class. I had no previous like knowledge or practice in that at all. I made terrible sculpture all semester, and it was one of the best things for my writing life that I could have done, right? So I'm curious how your engagement with other kinds of art kind of feeds your writing, what you learn. Like I learned a lot of craft, for example. So I'm just curious what you glean from those other kind of arts and media.
So I love ekphrasis, and it's one of the things that I do to teach students. We take art, and we actually did a partnership between UMSL students, undergrad students in fine arts, and then my students. I think what you just said is really important, right? Like you do have to understand the craft, and I think it's easier sometimes to see the craft through another medium, and then respond to that. And so I think that that's a really good practice. My husband is a photographer, and we've done residencies together, and we do this thing where some, friends like suggest topics and we throw them all into an envelope. We get to the residency, we pull out one, we're like, okay, that's the topic. So he goes and takes a picture, and then I write a poem, and then we spend the week trading back and forth. It's like he'll give me the next picture, and then we have these two response things. And so I do think that there's some value in seeing it through that filter, which is really useful.
Yeah, I think that it's like a way to break out sometimes for me. If I'm, like I spend so much time reading, I spend so much time thinking about the craft of poetry, the craft of writing, and so sometimes, whether it's a painting or whether it's music, something that just sort of jolts me a little bit, out of my my normal sort of parameters, I guess you might say, or my normal definitions of things, I think it's a good challenge sometimes. And I think what I'm often thinking about is how an artist comes at something differently. So like you brought up sculpture. And if you think about like a writer, you start with a blank screen or a blank piece of paper and then we add to it. But a sculptor starts with a block of something and they start subtracting, right? And so things like that get me thinking when I'm looking at something that's different is, well, their whole way of going about this, of creating something is very different. What if I approached writing as taking a block and chipping away at it, right? And so I'll do that sometimes. And really, if you think about it, poetry has all that space in it for, that white space, that open space. And so I'll try things like that. So I'll have something and, and I have a rule for myself. I'm not allowed to delete for 5 drafts, because otherwise I would delete before I got 1 draft, right? And so it works well to think then about chopping, right? Because then you go in after you've had 5 drafts, and you're like, now it's time to chisel this, right? And like really get some kind of shape to it. So that's sort of what I do. Like sometimes I think with paintings, like I love Picasso, obviously, is how can I make something monochromatic with writing, and I'll try like tonally. And so I'll try to do something like that. So I try to steal from them in those ways, if that makes sense.
I like that. There's a great David Whyte poem that I like called Everything is Waiting for You. And he says, put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. It's like the tea kettle is singing, the cooking pots have seen the good at you at last, And I think that's something a lot of us can understand a little better after the pandemic. And for me, that's part of what it is with paintings and engaging with other kinds of art. It's a conversation piece. And sometimes I feel a little bit like when I've got my poet hat on, it's kind of an excuse to be a little crazy in that for me, it's a willingness to listen to the world in this really direct way. And I think, I just saw the Joan Mitchell and Monet exhibit at the St. Louis Art Museum, and you stand in front of a painting like that, and it's this opportunity to engage directly in a conversation and listen to how the painter heard the thing. And one of the things Joan Mitchell said in a little video, if you go to this, I highly recommend it. She said something like she's looking at a tree, and what she's drawing is her interpretation of the tree, and she can never draw the tree. She can never paint the tree. But the process of doing that is her way of expressing gratitude for the tree's existence. And so I feel like a lot of art is sort of passing around something magical inside of that way of being in conversation with the world. And so for me, like the music and the painting that I'm drawn to, that's what I'm drawn to, is something like a Rothko or something that's giving me a direct offering of something they felt. Again, it's the butterfly in the jar. And then I see that butterfly in my own way and express it in my own language. And it's kind of the cool part of being human in this world. It's just like, wow, this is nuts. Like, let's try to express about it.
Thank you all very much. I'm gonna close this up by asking the same question I ask everyone, and I'm gonna start because I'm gonna give you a chance to think about it on your own. I'm opening up my St. Louis Public Library app because I didn't want to get the author incorrect, but I'm going to ask you all to share a writer, a podcast, an artist, something in the artsy world, preferably the literary world, that is really, really pumping you up these days. Something you discovered, new to you or new in the world, that you think folks might be interested in too. I just discovered over the last week or two that I very rarely read poetry for pleasure. Don't kill me. I love reading fiction. That's what really keeps me going. And there's a fantastic writer from South America named Mariana Enriquez, who had a book, it was pretty well received a few years ago, called, I believe, The Dangers of Smoking in Bed. But she has a new book called Our Share of Night, and I'm currently in the queue, and I'm like checking my email every day to make sure that's waiting for me the next branch. So she does this really wonderful thing where it's sort of like early Stephen King, where it's really, really smart and so scary because she doesn't describe what's behind the door, right? There are no jump scares. It's just kind of, you don't see what you don't see, and that's what makes it even scarier. So strongly recommend her. What else is giving you wonderful art vibes these days? Anybody?
What?
I saved it last time.
Alright, it's my turn to start first, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is probably like something that everybody already knows about, but for years I've gotten a poem a day email, and just like less than a year ago, I discovered that you could also just subscribe to it to listen to it on an app, and that's kind of lame because all of you probably already know about it, but just being able to listen to it, every day, just having that as part of my day has been a really nice addition. And again, it's probably not news to most of you, but I like it a lot.
Yeah,
And I'm just a little slow with some of the things that are out there.
Okay, well, my boring, everybody probably knows this one example is I'm very obsessed with Ross Gay. I think he's amazing. He saves the idea that you could be an ecstatic poet in modern times for me, so love him. If you don't know his book, Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, it's amazing. And then the other piece coming to my mind is I really like when people combine music and poetry, and they might call it lyrics, but I hear just poetry. Eric Gale. There's this guy named Eric Gale who comes out of New Orleans, I think. He was recently up for a Grammy, and I got to see him perform, and he blew my mind with the way he did poetry, not just with his words, but with the way he played guitar as well. So I get really lit up by people that have that dual capacity to do the language thing and the music thing at the same time. So that's a person I recommend checking out.
So you have to be really careful when you're the editor of a journal.
You can plug it. It's okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, but you do, because it's like if you seemingly are favoring anybody, and I mean, I could name a lot of poets who are doing amazing things. Today's Ted Kuzer's birthday. So for those of you who are a little bit more traditionalist, today's Ted's birthday. Happy birthday, Ted. We were talking about Ilya Kaminsky and his amazing wife, Katie Ferris, her book about going through cancer during the COVID pandemic is just stunning. But I'm going to go with something that's a little bit more pop culture that might surprise people a little bit. And that is, I love the fact that we are starting to occasionally see in really unexpected places literature. And so I'm guessing some of you have heard of Ted Lasso, which is this, semi-comic, but actually really dramatic and quite poignant television show that's on Apple TV about this guy who goes to coach a soccer team, football team in England, and he doesn't know anything about it. And on the surface, it seems like this really silly premise, except that it just started its third season, and throughout the 3 seasons, characters are frequently reading books, and it's easy to miss at first, but they're always reading books, and at one point he even gives copies of books to all the players, and the books are very symbolic. And I really just love the fact that Jason Sudeikis and Brent Goldstein and what's the guy who plays Coach Beards? What's his name? We should know this because anyway, they're all clearly literary people. This didn't just happen. They're writing it in. And so I just love the fact that this major pop culture sensation has actually woven in all of this classic and contemporary literature, and I just think that's really very cool.
Yes, I love it. I'm that guy who will pause it and rewind it just so I can check out what are you trying to tell me by putting Hemingway in there. Perfect. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. So I'm going to close this out by telling you that our next reading, I'm going to close this out by asking you to show appreciation to these poets. Our next reading in May is on the 23rd, when our readers will be Andy Chen, Kimberly Moore, and Richard Steinmack. I am still looking to fill out my slate for the year. So if you are a poet looking to read, or if you know a poet who would be looking to read, please put them in touch with me. I would be glad to get them a slot. You will be able to view tonight's reading on Facebook and on our website, or YouTube, I should say, after tonight. So a big thank you to those who are checking out this video after April 25th in the future. Thank you again to the poets for sharing your work. Thanks, as always, to Aaron Quick for for being our wizard behind the curtain, making sure all the technology is just set up and running and going well, and for being my partner in crime. Thanks to you for showing up in person for a poetry reading in 2023. It's always amazing. Get home safely, take care of each other. Good night.